My name is Lindsay, and right now I'm sitting in the penthouse of a Korean mob boss on the 48th floor, with a tracker bracelet on my ankle and a view of night Chicago like someone else's life behind glass. 6 weeks ago, I was a waitress, carrying trays and tips in my pocket. Now I'm the personal headache of a man half this city is afraid of. And the main thing is, I still haven't decided whether I want to kill him or save him. The strangest part is that it all started with one sentence, spoken in a language I swore I'd never use again. Korean was the voice of my childhood, the voice of my father, and of the world I'd been running from for 15 years. I hid it like a scar under the clothes of a new life. Until that night at Palazzo Nero, when the waitstaff officially stopped being afraid of me, but one Korean dragon started to be. In the evenings, Palazzo Nero looked like a temple of money. The dark marble floor reflected crystal chandeliers. Cocktails cost about as much as my weekly rent, and everyone who came in brought with them the smell of power and lies. I walked between tables in a black uniform, collecting glasses, memorizing faces and conversations, but pretending I was furniture, invisible, my favorite status. I was used to noticing details, rings on politicians' fingers, the tremor in the hands of those who'd lost more than they could afford, the looks from security when someone you must never anger walked in. That night, the air felt heavier than usual, like before a storm. The music played soft jazz, but everything inside me was beating to a different rhythm, anxious, insistent. I didn't know why. I just felt that something was about to crack. When the doors opened and he walked in, the restaurant went quiet for a second, almost imperceptibly. Tall, in a perfectly tailored dark suit, with a dragon tattoo crawling out from under his collar onto his neck. 4 men walked with him, quieter than shadows, more attentive than cameras. This was San Ho Min, a man whose name in the Korean part of the city was spoken through clenched teeth, in a half-whisper like a diagnosis. I already knew his face, but until that evening we'd never crossed paths. They gave him the corner by the window, table number 9, where waiters were usually sent with the instruction, "Don't breathe too loud." I was holding a tray with water and wine when the manager stopped me at the bar. "Lindsay, table 9, he asked for you specifically." I froze for a second. The manager didn't even try to hide his fear. "Don't look him in the eye. Don't say anything extra. Just serve and walk away alive, okay?" I nodded, even though everything inside me jumped. I walked up to the table, feeling my sneakers slide over the perfect marble. I set down the glasses, poured water, kept my eyes on the white tablecloth. They were speaking Korean, fast, sharp, like cutting with a knife. I understood every word, though I pretended it was just background noise. Right up until I heard a phrase that made my skin flare hot under the uniform. "Look at this woman," San said lazily, almost bored. "Standing there like a dog waiting for its master to throw it a bone. Black people always understand their place so well." His men snorted. Someone laughed quietly. It wasn't the cruelest comment I'd heard in this life, but it hit exactly the spot where all my attempts to stay silent were buried. I put down the last glass and suddenly realized I couldn't just walk away. In my head, my father's voice flashed. "Sometimes silence is a crime, too, baby girl." I lifted my eyes and, for the first time, looked him straight in the face. In his gaze, I didn't exist, only convenient service. And then I did something I didn't expect even from myself. I spoke Korean. "Gyeonan," I said clearly, with the heavy Busan accent he couldn't possibly miss. Aren't you the dog here?" The words rang out over the table like shattered glass. His men's faces stretched. One dropped his fork. San froze. For a second, the restaurant went so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Somewhere, someone stopped chewing. I saw recognition flare in his eyes. Not of me, of the accent. Busan. Working-class district, grandmothers in the courtyard, fried fish, and shouting through open windows. A world I knew from my father, and, judging by the tattoo on his neck, his world too. He slowly set down his glass, wiped his fingers on a napkin, stood up. The entire restaurant was watching only the two of us. "What did you say?" he asked in English now, softly, almost gently. My knees felt weak, but I didn't back down. "You heard me," I answered in Korean. And by the way, I understand perfectly when someone calls me a dog, even if they think I won't. His men exchanged looks. Someone whispered, "Is she one of us?" He came closer, so close I could smell the faint scent of expensive cologne mixed with cigarette smoke and something metallic. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Lindsay." "Lindsay." He repeated my name like he was tasting it. "You've just made the most interesting mistake of your life." He tossed a few $100 bills onto the table and left without looking back. His men rushed after him. A minute later, Vincent, the manager, flew up to me, white as the tablecloth. "Are you out of your mind? What did you say? Did he laugh? Was he pleased?" I just stared at the door. Vincent grabbed my elbow. "Pack your things. You're fired. If he comes back angry, I'll say you're already gone. It might save your life." I walked to the staff room in silence, feeling everything inside me sink into a void. I didn't argue. Losing a job hurt, but it was familiar. Losing faces, homes, familiar streets that I was good at. Moving to Chicago had been one more attempt to start over. Just another city where no one knew who your family was or how much blood they'd left behind. I changed into my old jeans, grabbed my tips from the locker, and left through the back door, thinking the story was over. I was wrong. The first 2 days after being fired passed strangely quietly. I picked up shifts at a coffee shop on the other side of town, counted change, smiled at customers, pretended I wasn't thinking about the tattooed Korean whose eyes still flashed in my head at night. But the feeling of being watched didn't go anywhere. It was like the streets were looking at me more closely than before. Cameras under awnings, cars that stayed too long parked across the road. That evening, I was closing my shift at the coffee shop. Late autumn, damp cold getting into your bones, asphalt shining with rain. I walked home past graffiti, dumpsters, and dark shop windows when a black SUV slowly rolled out from the intersection and drove along the curb beside me. The windows were tinted. The engine sounded too smooth for this neighborhood. I already knew how this would end. The car stopped, the door opened, and 2 men in dark jackets stepped onto the sidewalk. Koreans. Their movements were professional, with no wasted motion. One raised his hand slightly to the side, as if showing, "We have guns, but we're not drawing them yet." "Miss Carlson," he said in English, "Mr. San kindly asks you to come with us. Now." The voice was polite, but there wasn't a gram of request in it. "And if I refuse?" I asked, even though I knew the answer. The second man gave a tiny shrug. "Then we'll have to do this in a less comfortable way. But Mr. San would prefer to avoid unnecessary attention." There wasn't a soul around. The wind chased a plastic bag along the pavement. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. I thought of how my father taught me to count options. Right now, there were only 2. I chose the one where at least my dignity would survive. I climbed into the car by myself. Inside, it smelled of leather, coffee, and that same expensive cologne I remembered from the restaurant. The windows were even darker from the inside. Doors slammed, locks clicked. The car glided forward. "You're not going to blindfold me?" I asked, looking straight ahead. The driver glanced at me in the mirror. "If you see the road, you still won't get away. And if you don't, it'll only be scarier. Why make this harder?" We drove for a long time, weaving through the night city. I counted turns, memorized sounds, a bridge where the noise under the wheels turned metallic, a traffic light with a long signal, the echo of a tunnel. It wasn't paranoid habit. It was training. My father always said, "If they take you, count seconds, listen to the street. Sometimes that's what gives you a chance." I didn't know if it would, but I counted. Finally, the car stopped in an underground parking lot. We were met by the dry smell of concrete and gasoline. Elevator, long hallway, another elevator. Cameras and silence everywhere. We went up so high my ears popped. The man on the side pulled out a card, swiped it through the reader on the wall, and heavy black doors opened in front of us. A penthouse, captivity with a panoramic view. I walked in first. The space was absurdly huge. Glass walls, a view of night Chicago, magazine-perfect furniture, floors like mirrors. Everything was so perfect, so clean, like no one actually lived here, only performed a role. He stood by the window. No jacket, in a white shirt unbuttoned one extra button. In the reflection of city lights, the dragon on his neck looked alive. "Thank you, Marcus," he said in Korean, without turning around. "I'll handle it from here." The men disappeared behind the door, and we were left alone. For a while, he just looked at the city, hands in his pockets. Then he slowly turned. His gaze ran over me from head to toe, not like a man sizing up a woman, but like a surgeon assessing a complicated operation. "You made yourself very hard to find," he said. "You could have just asked to talk," I replied, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. He smirked. "I'm used to the fact that when I just ask, people start crying or running. You, as I recall, call me a dog in the language of my grandmothers. That's a non-standard reaction." He took a few steps toward me. "Sit." I sat on the edge of the white leather couch like it was someone else's altar. He sat opposite, leaning his elbows on his knees. Between us was a low darkwood coffee table with only one item on it, my photo from my Palazzo Nero badge. I didn't even remember when they'd taken it. In the picture, I looked tired and wary. "You hid the fact you speak Korean," he began. "Why?" I looked at my photo, then back at him. "Because Korean attracts attention from the wrong kind of people. And I've spent my whole life trying to be that little person no one looks at. You are an excellent illustration of why that was a pretty good strategy." He tilted his head slightly. "But that strategy broke when they called you a dog? That strategy broke when a man who reminds me of half my childhood decided he could talk about me like I'm furniture," I said. "I've swallowed a lot of things, but not from someone who sounds like my neighbors in a Busan courtyard and looks at me like I'm not human." His eyes flickered for a second. "Busan," he repeated, like tasting the word. He was silent for a while. Then he stood up and came closer. "Where did you get that accent? You can't learn it in a course. They don't sell it in language schools in Chicago." He spoke gently, but every word pressed down. I felt an old fear rise up. The smell of bleach in cheap social services corridors. A woman's voice. "Your father is dead, sweetheart. We can't." I swallowed it and said, "My father was Korean, from Busan." "Name?" he asked instantly. I smirked. "Do you always start with paperwork? Maybe offer tea first." He didn't smile back. "Name?" I gulped. My father's real name was something I hid even from myself. "Mitch Carlson," I said, using the version people knew us by in Atlanta. His gaze narrowed a little. He seemed to be listening not only to me, but to something inside his own memory. "Carlson," he repeated. "Black American, speaking Korean like a dock worker. Remarkable." He paced the room like a caged animal. "I checked your file. Before 13. Nothing. No records. Then, foster care, state system, cheap schools. That's not a normal biography. That looks like a carefully wiped trail." His voice hardened. "Who was he before Atlanta?" I felt my fingers dig into the denim. "He was my father. That's enough." Sand stopped right in front of me. "Not enough," he said quietly. "Not in my world. In my world, men like your father either kill or die. Sometimes both. And when I see a woman who speaks with my dead grandmother's accent, I can't afford the luxury of not knowing where she came from." "Then we've got a problem," I answered, lifting my eyes to him, "because the people who knew my father before Atlanta are either dead or hiding so deep you won't get to them. And I don't want to be part of that story anymore." He stared at me for a long, too long moment, then suddenly said, "Too late. You're already part of mine." He turned away, walked to the bar, poured himself whiskey. "You're going to stay here." "Excuse me?" I even laughed at how absurd that sounded. "You're going to stay here," he repeated, like he was stating the weather. "For a while, until I understand whether you're a threat to me." I stood up. "This is kidnapping." He shrugged. "This is protection. People saw you talking to me at the restaurant. Those who hate me will think you're my weakness. In this city, weaknesses don't live long." "And what if I don't want your protection?" I asked, feeling that familiar anger flare inside. "Your wants are a luxury," he said without malice. "You have a roof, food, clothes, and time to explain why your Korean sounds like the soundtrack of my childhood. Believe me, there are worse cages." There was something in his voice that made me feel ashamed of my anger for half a second. The room they gave me looked like a hotel suite I could never afford. A big bed with crisp sheets, a floor-to-ceiling window, a bathroom with more marble than our old kitchen. Clothes lay on the armchair. Neatly folded jeans, t-shirts, a hoodie, all my size. It's a weird feeling when you're kidnapped and they immediately match you a wardrobe. I closed the door, leaned my back against it, and finally let myself exhale, quietly, slowly. My head buzzed like a lift bouncing between floors. I was supposed to be scared. Usually at this point people cry, beat on the door, look for a phone. I just sat on the edge of the bed and thought, "Well, Dad, looks like the past finally found me." And somewhere deep inside, just a tiny bit, it felt easier, because the running had stopped. The first days in the penthouse felt like a strange experiment. I woke up to the smell of fresh coffee and the sound of the city behind glass. I could walk around the apartment, read books from the shelves, watch the news on a huge screen. The door to the hallway was closed from the outside, but not locked completely. Sometimes Marcus came in, brought food, left a phone, for internal calls only. Freedom with a leash. San showed up on a schedule no one ever voiced. Sometimes in the morning with a laptop, sometimes late at night smelling of cigars and rain on his coat. He asked questions about my childhood, about how my father mixed English and Korean, what songs he sang when he was drunk. Sometimes I answered, sometimes I didn't. In return, I asked my own questions, and between the lines of his stories, another life emerged. Not glamorous at all. At night, he was almost always standing at the window. A few times I came out for water and found him there in the half-dark, glass in hand. The city below glowed and writhed, and he looked at it like he was trying to calculate how many people had died down there so he could be up here. Once I couldn't help myself and asked, "Do you ever sleep?" He didn't even turn. Sometimes, when the past lets me. On the 18th night, he came back later than usual. His shirt was open, a fresh wound along his side, dark spreading through the white fabric. Marcus fussed with a first aid kit, but San waved him off. "Get out." When the door closed, he noticed me in the doorway. "You should be in your room." I stepped closer. "You're bleeding on my new carpet? Is that part of the protection package too?" He started to say something but fell silent when I took the kit from Marcus and walked over. "Sit," I said automatically in the same tone I used with my father when I stitched him up in our kitchen. San sat on the chair, trying to keep some dignity. I cut the shirt around the wound. The bullet had grazed him, leaving a long, angry line. "This is going to sting," I warned and poured antiseptic over the cut. He hissed through his teeth but didn't pull away. "Who taught you to do this?" he asked as I put the bandage on. "My father," I said. "He thought first aid was more important than algebra." "Smart man." There was no sarcasm in his voice. I froze for a second. "Smart people don't get involved with men like you," I said quietly. He smirked with one corner of his mouth. "Smart people don't stay to patch me up when they could go back to their safe room." I taped down the edges of the bandage and stepped back. "I didn't do it for you," I said. "I did it because I can't stand to watch someone bleed if I can stop it." He nodded like he accepted that as fact. For a few seconds, we just looked at each other, too close. I suddenly saw not only danger in his eyes, but a deep-seated exhaustion, like he'd been wanting to lie down and sleep for a very long time, but wars kept shaking him awake. "You think I'm a monster?" he said calmly. I shrugged. "I think you do things no person should be doing. But sometimes, when you're standing at the window, you look like you hate it just as much as I do." He snorted. "That's why you're dangerous, Lindsay. You see more than someone in your position is supposed to." "And you're keeping me here not because of the Korean," I answered. "You're keeping me here because you're scared of being alone with yourself." He didn't expect that. I saw that thought slice through his certainty for a second. "Interesting hypothesis," he said, standing up. "But armchair psychology doesn't change the fact that your father might have been the one who betrayed my family." The words slammed into my chest, cold, without warning. "What?" I managed. He looked at me differently now, not as a puzzle, but as a potential threat. "My brother had one guy, Black Korean from Busan. Many years ago, he disappeared with our money." I heard a long boarded-up door open in my head. My father coming home covered in blood and saying, "We're leaving, now, no questions." A suitcase packed in 20 minutes, a night road, a cheap motel, new IDs. He was jumpy, always looking out the window, saying, "If anyone asks, I've always been Mitch Carlson, got it?" No word about Busan to anybody. Back then I was a kid and thought he was just tired of Korea. The lie suddenly formed a new pattern. "You think my father took your money?" I asked, feeling my voice catch. "And for that, you—" I couldn't finish. He looked right at me, straightforward. "3 years ago in Atlanta, I shot a man named Mitch Carlson," he said quietly. "He died knowing why, or at least thinking he did." The world tilted. The air in the room turned thick like syrup. I saw that hospital room again, the smell of disinfectant, the shot behind the door, and a face that flashed in the hallway for half a second. I just hadn't wanted to remember it. "That was you," I whispered. Now the puzzle clicked fully into place. An Asian-featured man, cold eyes, fast stride. Back then I'd been paralyzed by shock. Now I was paralyzed by realization. "You killed my father." There were several meters between us, but it felt like he was standing right under my skin. He didn't look away. If he really was who I think he was. Yes. No excuses, no softening, just fact. Silence rang. Outside the glass, cars roared, billboards flickered, but that world no longer existed. There was only this man and the memory of a hospital corridor. I walked closer, close enough to hear his breathing. "Then why am I still alive?" I asked. He blinked. "Because when I aimed a gun at you in my head," he answered, "I didn't see him. I saw you. And for the first time in many years, I felt worse, not at the thought that I couldn't kill, but at the thought that I could." I recognized that look. As a child, I'd seen it on my father's face when he stared at himself in the mirror after another fight. In a world where men made their living with fists and bullets, regret was considered weakness. But it still broke through. "He wasn't a monster," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "He saved 17 women. Do you even know why he left your brother?" San frowned. "That's the part of the story I was never told." I raised my hand and threw him a small key on a ring, the one I'd worn under my t-shirt for so many years I'd forgotten what it felt like not to. He caught it, examined it. "Gary, Indiana," I said. "A storage unit off the highway. If you killed my father for stealing your money, you at least owe it to yourself to see what exactly he paid for." Something flashed in his eyes. Something like fear mixed with resolve. "You're coming with me." The storage unit in Gary greeted us with the smell of rust and abandonment. Marcus stayed in the car. Inside it was cold. We had to switch the light on manually. Dust flew up like a swarm of tiny insects. San opened the metal unit with the key that had hung on my neck like a talisman for years. Inside were boxes and a metal cabinet. On one box, in familiar handwriting, was written, "If you're reading this, it means everything went exactly the way I feared." We sat right down on the concrete floor. San cut the tape, pulled out folders, old flash drives, printouts, statements, wire transfers, photos of containers, medical reports. In the center lay a letter. He unfolded it and started reading aloud. My father's voice, translated from paper into air, told of girls brought from Korea as waitresses, of houses where their will was broken, of San's older brother who called it business. I watched San's features change layer by layer. First disbelief, then irritation, then horror blended with disgust at himself. His hand trembled when he read the line, "I didn't take this money as loot, but as proof. If I die, it has to be used to destroy what your brother built." He dropped the letter onto his knees, closed his eyes. "He wasn't a traitor," I said quietly. "He was what you wanted to be." He didn't answer. He just stood up, walked over to the wall and pressed his forehead against it. His shoulders shook, but he didn't make a sound. I'd never seen a man like him cry before. It was scarier than any shout, because in that moment, not just some legend was collapsing. His personal mythology was collapsing, that he was continuing a legacy, that his war was righteous. Turned out he'd just been avenging a lie for a very long time. I stepped closer and stopped at arm's length. "Now you know," I said. "What are you going to do?" He turned around. His eyes were red, but his voice was steady again, only deeper. "First, I'll destroy everything that's left of this business," he said. "Then I'll hand these people over to those who still have some sense of justice left. And then..." He looked at me like he was asking permission for the first time in his life. "And then, if you don't put a bullet in my head, I'll try to live with what I've done." I smiled a little through my tears. "If I'd wanted to shoot you," I said, "I'd have done it the moment you told me about Atlanta. But my father taught me something else. He used to say, 'The circle of revenge never ends by itself. Someone has to break it.'" I think he knew that job would end up being mine. San came closer, stopping right in front of me. "You really believe someone like me can be anything else?" "I believe people like you have already proven they can do the impossible," I answered. "You built an empire out of shadows, which means you can tear it down. The question isn't whether you can, it's whether you want to live without fear and lies, and whether you're willing to pay the price people pay when they go against their own." He watched me for a long time, like he was trying to see if I had a hidden knife. "If I start tearing this down," he said at last, "they'll come for both of us. People who enjoyed making money on someone else's pain don't like it when their business turns into a criminal case. You can still choose. Disappear, change cities, names, uniforms. I can make sure no one ever finds you." I felt a strange calm settle in. "I'm tired of disappearing. If I have to die, I'd rather do it for something than just from fear." He stepped closer again. Now there was less than half a meter between us. "Do you understand what you're saying, Lindsay?" he asked softly. "If you stay, you won't be a hostage. You'll be an accomplice. Not my victim, my partner. It's dirty work, even if the goal is clean. Your hands will have blood on them too. The only difference is, you'll know what it's there for." I held his gaze. "I'm already living with blood on my memory. The only difference is that now I'll have a chance to redeem some of it." At some point his hand reached toward my cheek on its own. His fingers were warm, heavy, unexpectedly gentle for a man used to holding weapons. I should have pulled away. My brain was screaming that, replaying the gunshot in the hospital. But instead, I closed my eyes for a second and allowed myself to feel one more strange thing. Next to this man who killed my father, I was, for the first time in a long while, not a little girl running away, but a woman making a choice. "We're both insane," he almost whispered. "Most likely, yeah," I replied. "But honestly, normal people rarely change the world. They just try to survive in it." His thumb slid along my cheekbone like he was checking if I was real. "I'm not asking you to love me," he said. "I know very well how many things in me can't be forgiven. But I need you to know." I can't look at you and see only the enemy's daughter anymore. I see you. Just you. I opened my eyes and, for the first time in this whole conversation, smiled without sarcasm. My father hated the word enemy, I said. He used to say there's no them and us. There are just people who once made a choice. Sometimes the wrong one. Sometimes the best they could in that moment. You've made a lot of wrong ones. But if you really destroy what your family stands on, that'll be a choice he'd respect. We left the storage unit when dawn was already breaking. The sky in the east was turning pale pink, and the city ahead looked like a battlefield before the fight starts. In the car, Marcus silently started the engine. On the back seat between us sat the box of evidence, heavy as fate. Sand stared ahead, jaw clenched. "From this moment there's no way back," he said. I nodded. There hasn't been a way back for me for 15 years. Maybe it's finally time to look forward. When we got back to the penthouse, the city below was going about its morning rush, knowing nothing of the war being prepared above it. Sand set the box on the living room table like a bomb waiting to be detonated. "First, prosecutors, journalists," he said almost to himself. "Then cleaning house inside. I'll lose money, people, influence." He looked over at me. "If you decide to leave when it all starts, I won't stop you." "You stubbornly keep giving me a choice," I said, walking to the window. "Even though you've spent years taking it away from everyone else. That's progress already." The cars below looked tiny, like toys. People hurried about their small lives, unaware that decisions up here would soon change their neighborhoods, their streets, their safety. "I'm staying," I added without turning. "Not because you're holding me. Because I want to see the ones who thought they could break lives forever finally fall." He came up beside me and stopped at arm's length. "I don't know how this ends," he said honestly. "We might go to prison. We might get killed before the trial. We might survive and build something new on the ruins. But I know one thing for sure. If I'm going to burn, I want to burn next to the person who showed me I can be more than someone's sun and someone's shadow." His words sounded like a vow, even though he didn't call it that. I turned and met his eyes. The cold emptiness from that first night at the restaurant was gone. There was pain, guilt, fear, and something else I was afraid to name. Maybe that was love, not yet fully formed, frightening us both. "Then let's agree on this, San Ho Min," I said. "We don't promise each other happiness. That would sound like a joke. We promise each other the truth, even when it tears us apart." He nodded. "Truth," he repeated, "and choice, even when it's terrifying." I held out my hand to him the way I used to as a little girl to my father when we crossed the street. He looked at my palm, then put his in it, warm, heavy, scarred. In that moment, I understood that if someone were filming our story, it wouldn't be a drama about a mob boss and a waitress. It would be a story about two people who'd lived too long in someone else's script and finally decided to write their own, even if the ending is still ahead and unknown to anyone.